So welcome to Making Thinking Central in Math Classrooms. I am your host for this evening. My name is Rob Baier. I'm the Pennsylvania lead here at Innovamat. I'm also co-host of the Debate Math podcast with Chris Lesniak. And here this evening, we have two really wonderful people who are going to talk about making thinking central in math classrooms. I'm going to allow both of them to introduce themselves. I'm going to start with Albert. Albert, go ahead and let everybody know who you are and what brings you here tonight too.
Okay, I'm gonna stop presenting. Thank you, Rob, so we can see each other's faces bigger. So yeah, my name is Albert. I am one of the math learning specialists at Innovamat. These days focused in the US, even though, as you can probably guess from my accent, I am from Barcelona in Spain. And long story short, I used to be an engineer, then I became a math teacher, first high school, and then afterwards I turned my eyes into elementary. My PhD about to finish is focused on elementary. And yeah, I met Innovamat since the very beginning. It was not even called Innovamat. We were just a bunch of math nerds trying to change the world one school at a time back in Barcelona. And well, we will probably dive deeper later, but now things went a little bigger, and our adventure made us discover other realities, other educational realities in other countries, especially now that I'm focused in the US. So my focus is here, learning a lot from American classrooms, seeing what can we contribute to it.
And my name's Peter Liljedahl. I'm a professor of mathematics education at Simon Fraser University. I've been there for 21 years, former high school math teacher, and I am currently spending most of my time, I would say 99% of my time, working around the ideas of building thinking classrooms. I just got back from South Korea, where I spent 3 days working with teachers there. And I am now sort of at home. I'm near home. I'm skiing these days.
Lucky you.
Nice. Yeah, lucky you for sure. So going into tonight's webinar, a lot of people are here because of building thinking classrooms, and there might be majority of the people here are wondering who is Innovamat and how did this all happen. So, Peter, could you provide a brief overview of building thinking classrooms and Innovamat collaboration and how it came to be?
Yeah. Okay. So we first met. Albert and I first met at NCTM in Washington. And I remember Albert had some really good questions for me. He was telling me that he represents this company called Innovamat, and there's these ideas, and we started having these conversations, and, never enough time. So it felt like we started the conversation. And then we saw each other again in Syracuse a few months later, and we were able to continue the conversation. And I think that was where you kind of suggested that maybe Innovamat can be involved in the Spanish translation of building.
Well, first I was surprised that you didn't have the book in Spanish yet, right? So that was the first idea that we had together.
Yeah. And I think there was a connection that there's a special place in my heart around Barcelona. And so there was a connection there. And then we kept seeing each other, right? We saw each other at CMC Central. We saw each other at the Building Thinking Classroom Conference in Phoenix. And then and it wasn't always Albert. There was this team of people I would run into. They always traveled in twos. And I would run into two different guys, and then two different people, and then two different people. But there was always this feeling like there was a conversation that we were engaged in. And it was an ongoing conversation. And every time we were together, the conversation continued a little bit further until I would say Chicago, NCTM Chicago. We sat down and we spent several hours together looking at Innovamat as a curriculum, not just Innovamat as problem solving or Innovamat as it fits in with building thinking classrooms, but what is actually Innovamat as a curriculum. And I remember sitting in that one big table together, looking through the documents around how you actually build your lessons and turn this connectivity that exists within mathematics into something that then can exist within classrooms. I called it the spreadsheet of doom, but it was this massive interconnected map of mathematics. And, you know, through these conversations that we've been having all along, there was this ongoing synergy between the way we both were thinking about what teaching should look like, but also the role of mathematics in teaching, and how they have to work together, because mathematics has an internal logical structure and how we can bring that out for students to see. And then when we got to sit in Chicago and really look at the foundational documents and see how the connectivity really was strong, I would say that was where the conversation, I don't want to say the conversation finished, but that was where it kind of felt like, okay, chapter 1 of our conversation is finished.
How to consolidate a conversation, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
and then what else was intriguing about the Innovamat curriculum as you two dove into it? Because I know you talked about a few things there, but like as Albert shared, like the not just like the spreadsheet of doom, as you said, but like what were some of the other things that you saw?
So for me, there was really 2 things that stood out strongly. One was the way Innovamat was professionalizing the teacher, looking at the teacher as the most powerful and most useful resource in the classroom, right? That the teacher is empowered to be an expert within the classroom and within mathematics within the classroom, and to guide that lesson, that the lesson wasn't teacher proofed, right? The lesson needed the teacher to work alongside it. But at the same time, it gave the teacher autonomy for how to navigate this lesson, right? So that was one thing that was super, super important, that empowerment of the teacher, the what I call the reprofessionalization of teachers. So that was one thing. The second thing was that I felt was really a breath of fresh air for me was there was so much room within that lesson because of this reprofessionalization for the teacher to bring their own pedagogy to it, whatever that pedagogy is, but to bring their pedagogy into it. So Innovamat wasn't all consuming. It didn't use up all of the minutes and all of the room within the lesson, leaving the teacher just to have to follow a set of instructions. And that really gives so much room for building thinking classroom to flourish alongside Innovamat within a curricular lesson. There isn't anything in Innovamat that contradicts BTC. In fact, most of the things in Innovamat, because they're built on the same foundation of trying to get students to think in the classroom, actually just work together perfectly. But it's one thing to say that these things are compatible. It's another thing to actually leave the room within the lesson for a BTC teacher to implement their building thinking classroom practices and enact the lesson, or vice versa for an Innovamat teacher, a teacher already using Innovamat, to enact the lesson and bring BTC practices into that. So there was just that. Those were the things that I found really intriguing.
Yeah, and you know, Peter, so if you're like you and I are probably in the same boat when we first met the Innovamat crew, right?
Yeah.
And so when I first met them, like I met them in Chicago, like you, it's probably the same week is my guess. And they're like you somehow met 2 of them. I think I met 14 all at once.
Oh yeah,
And
at the booth.
and so then like Albert, for everybody here who's saying like who is a Novamat? Could you provide like a brief overview of a Novamat, the resources that we have, the unique partnership model that we offer to schools and districts? That's that way we're all on the same page here, because I had no idea when I first met you.
You probably ask the wrong guy if you ask to be briefed about the Innovamat story, because I was there since the beginning and I feel it in my bones. But I'll try. And I like what Peter was saying about empowering teachers, because yes, we put the teacher at the center because we are teachers, right? And the shortest way for me to somehow pitch Innovamat is, if I had to, would be, imagine that your school district or your group of math teachers in your school, instead of being, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, depending on the size of your school district, is 300 people, math nerds, only thinking about how to make students think, how to make students critically develop an understanding of math. And I think that I cannot get tired of telling teachers that come to us is that we don't promise to have a all-in-one closed solution that solves everything and it's already done. this is a learning and a work in progress, and we keep learning and talking to teachers and learning from them. And that means, as Peter was saying, empowering teachers and putting teachers at the very center, at least next to the kids, right? So, and our journey is a little bit like at the beginning of the journey. As I said, a few nerds in Barcelona, we used to do a lot of PD for the Catalan or the Spanish government, and we've somehow thought that PD was great, and we still think that it's a massive transformation tool, but still teachers tended to go back to the comfort zone after the PD was over, right? So we decided to come up with this map of mathematical learning trajectories, and still, of course, learning and improving it. But we came with this kind of map, and then we thought, okay, let's design these resources for day-to-day instruction, because that's what, all together with PD and professional learning, will drive change. So we included all these ideas that we were reading and we were researching. We had some very good experts at the very beginning that are still our backbone: Cecilia, Laura, Judith in kindergarten, and we decided to bring all that expertise from research and from our classrooms to a day-to-day instructional program with, of course, at the very beginning, just a teaching guide for first grade that only 10 schools in Barcelona piloted. And nowadays, 7-8 years later, so almost 500,000 kids and more than 20,000 teachers in 10 countries using our resources, our instructional materials, teaching guides, online resources. And we also dare to open the door to intervention recently, and learning a lot with that assessment, which is also I know a part of Peter's interest, because it's also what navigates, especially in the US, that you test so early in third grade, right? And then maybe later we can talk about how these international connections make us reflect beyond what the scope of a country or of a state allows you to see. And yeah, we keep growing. And the only thing that I promise teachers is that our resources today are better than yesterday and worse than tomorrow, right? Because this is a work in progress. And I think that this collaboration, this partnership with Peter and with BTC is about precisely this: to make our resources better, to give this new layer of classroom management and pedagogy that allows teachers to go even beyond our tasks to really create a thinking classroom.
You know, and Albert, you touched on the resources a little bit, and that was part of what intrigued me to come into Innovamat as well. Were all the research that went into the development of these resources. I'm going to put you on the spot, Albert. In 2 minutes, like it's a double ride in an elevator. In 2 minutes,
Okay.
are we able to give a very high level overview of
I
the
probably hit the
foundation?
emergency. I hit the emergency button.
No,
and
we can't. We can't
there.
hit the emergency button. We can't hit it. So, in like 2 minutes, can we give a summary of some of these the research foundation to our Innovamat curriculum?
Just for the math nerds in the room that want to know our roots, and again, always backed not only by research and by very well-known authors, but also with our experience on top of it. I would quote, if I had to choose, Polya, and then Alan Schoenfield's work on problem solving. And we have been discussing this with Peter recently. George Polya has wonderful books about problem solving, saying that math is not just about exercises and repetition, but about thinking in the 40s. 1945, he has a wonderful book, How to Solve It, it's called, the book. And he already describes this kind of idea that we are defending today, like 80 years later, right? And then I would quote the Freudenthal Institute, back in Europe, is a very well-known institution, and our learning trajectories are deeply inspired by the work done by the Freudenthal Institute. I would also quote another European institution, Enrich, by Cambridge University, which is a great inspiration for us when it comes to think about tasks. Rich Tasks, wonderful website, Enrich. And then this, I would say that for me, coming from a mathematical background, being an engineer and seeing mathematics as a tool at the very beginning of my university career, opening the door to go beyond content and see math not just as a tool and as a set of contents that are needed to be learned, but also about a set of skills, problem-solving skills, reasoning, and all these like processes or mathematical practices part of the equation. I would quote then Mogens Nis, if I pronounce the Norwegian name correctly. Or Danish.
Yeah.
How was that, Peter?
Mogens.
Mogens. Oh, that's hard. Okay, I will try to remember. Yes, so yeah, a Danish author for the OECD that was writing a lot about math competencies. And then, of course, the NCTM. The NCTM, which made us meet Peter in the first hand, it has been a huge inspiration for us at Innovamat. And of course, we have a wonderful 200 pages white paper full of tons of references that we can link if anyone wants to go deeper.
It's a quick read.
What's so interesting about the references that Albert just listed there. So they're also the same references that I tap into in when I was doing my research for my PhD on creativity in mathematics, but also in building thinking classrooms. And I was just at the Freudenthal Institute just before Christmas, visiting them and giving a presentation on building thinking classrooms there. The book is in Dutch, and they're very intrigued by this and the impact that building thinking classrooms is having on teachers in the Netherlands. Yeah.
Yeah. So, all roads lead to Rome.
So Albert, that was pretty good. I think we'll have to go back and watch the tape to see if you went over the 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, you definitely did. All right, so Peter, coming to you again. So how does building thinking classroom practices complement and enhance a Innovamat curriculum? I'm curious because you talked about it a little bit earlier, but like how do those practices, your 14 practices, complement and enhance this Innovamat curriculum?
So first of all, and I every once in a while, about once a week, I get an email from somebody saying, we're interested in your program or we're interested in your curriculum. Building thinking classrooms is not a program. It's not a curriculum, right? Building thinking classrooms is a pedagogy. It's not even a pedagogy. It's pedagogies. It's research based on what are the necessary things we need to do as teachers if we want to get students to think, on the assumption that thinking is a necessary precursor to learning. And it's not an assumption. This is something we've known from psychology for decades. And the practices that have emerged from that are ways that we can enhance student collaboration, shape the way the classroom looks, shape the way we give our instructions to get the students going, the way we can hold ourselves back as a teacher because, we know so much. And if we don't watch it, we're going to just start giving away the answers too much. How we can control our own actions within this space. So not just how we build the space, how we fill the space, how we empower the learners to become thinkers, and then how we check our own selves in that space. So in theory, building thinking classrooms should be able to wrap itself around any content, right? Provided a couple of things. Number one, that content is sensibly enough constructed that the logical development of mathematical ideas within it is sort of in line with the way people actually learn from a psychological perspective, right? So like there could be some program out there that has a ridiculous order to things, and then I don't think any pedagogy can save it, right? But it also can wrap itself around any content, provided there's enough room for the teacher to bring that content to bear or bring that pedagogy to bear on the content. And that's, I talked about that earlier. But in essence, one of the things that I really like about Innovamat is, like Albert mentioned, digital resources. With the exception of once a week, students do not work in their computers, right? The digital medium is really just the way that Innovamat is taking their curriculum and bringing it to the teacher so that they in turn can bring it to their students. But students in an Innovamat lesson are meant to be collaborating, talking, working with manipulatives, working at the whiteboards. Like they're meant to be engaging in mathematics in ways that is really complementary to building thinking classrooms. So we can just easily take these ideas of random groups and vertical surfaces, quick launch, get the kids working at the whiteboards, bringing in manipulations and then manipulatives. And then at the very end, just that really powerful consolidation where we really bring the ideas home and really make sure that we're not just having a good time in the classroom and we're not just thinking, which is important, but that we're also turning that thinking into retained learning. So like building thinking classrooms can do that very easily with Innovamat.
Yeah, and I think to really bring it to life, Albert, can we share some examples here? So that way everybody, all 258 people are looking at this and saying, okay, we keep talking about Innovamat and these resources, these activities. I feel like we should probably show them a little bit.
We will, because we would feel like traitors if we didn't do math in Innovamat PD or webinar. So we have to. But let me say, just to pick up what Peter was saying, on the learnings that we have been including after deeply reading Building Thinking Classrooms over the past 3-4 years, is that one of the things that we noticed when in our lessons, in our sessions, was that the closing, in our core, we thought that teachers had to be like the ones at the center and deciding how to navigate the lesson. Sometimes we fell a little short in closing the lesson because we left that to the teacher's expertise. But the thing is that we have to take into account that some teachers still don't feel comfortable with this kind of pedagogy, because this generation of teachers is the one that has to break the wheel. We were not trained, or we did not attend a school in general in the same way that we are going to teach our kids. So we are kind of in an uncomfortable position as teachers, right? So after reading Building Thinking Classrooms and working with Peter, we are trying to close better the lesson, how to consolidate a class that has been very open. And I think that through the examples that we can explore in a second, we can talk also about this, about how to close the experience for it to be like on the spot, just at the end of the interaction with the kids. So I'm gonna present my screen.
And Albert, we'll have about 20 minutes to do our 2 activities here.
Let's go. So for the first one, we have to confess that we were discussing this activity a few weeks ago with Peter in a wonderful meeting that we had, and Peter, you can share how you felt doing the activity, and it is recorded, so we have to tell the truth about how we felt doing the activity. It was great. And then you said, maybe I try it. Next week I have to do something with some kids, and maybe I take this activity and I try it. So what I propose to you at the very beginning is I navigate through the activity real quick. I'm sorry that I'm gonna spoil it for the ones not knowing it. And then we can talk about these layers, how you added the Building Thinking Classroom perspective to it. And if you tried it, Peter, of course, we would love to hear how it went. So we would start asking, what do you see? What do you notice, right? And bring the conversation to, okay, this is first the kids say 100 chart. Well, yes and no, right? Somehow it resembles the 100 chart, but yeah, I don't see 100 there. Are there 100 cells there? So we can discuss a little further, and then we come to the agreement that this is 2-digit numbers, right? Whole numbers from 10 to 91. And then we introduce this idea, this very deep mathematical idea of persistence. In this case, multiplicative persistence. Of course, kids and most of us did not hear about persistence before. And then instead of trying to explain it, we show an example, right? Take a number, 36, and take its digits, in this case 3 and 6, and multiply them. You get 18. Is it still a 2-digit number? The answer is yes, so we have to keep going, right? There's where the word persistence comes from. We have to persist. Okay, so we take 18, we take the digits 1 and 8, we multiply them, and we get a 1-digit number. So we lost somehow the 2 digits after 2 steps, and therefore 36 has persistence 2. And now the opening question after all this conversation, that of course, depending on the age, can take a few minutes, the key question that navigates the session is, okay, what is, among all these numbers, the one that has the largest persistence? And here, maybe some people in the audience know the activity, and the ones that do not, you can start thinking. If you're watching this recorded, stop the video and think about it. But Peter, how did you feel when you were asked this question? You wanna navigate us through your line of
Oh
thought.
yeah, now you're asking me to recall things that happened like weeks ago. Oh, I liked it right away. I'm always on the lookout for problems that I feel would be really building thinking classrooms compatible, and this is one of them. This is something that the kids could do at the whiteboards right away. But nonetheless, from a personal perspective, diving in and trying to think about how I would solve this was I immediately looked at two-digit numbers that had which ones are definitely not going to be the highest. Like which ones can I eliminate right away? And immediately you can eliminate anything with a 0 in it or anything with a 1 because they're going to reduce to single-digit numbers immediately.
And that requires understanding deeply how multiplication
Yeah.
works, right? Low multiplications.
Yeah. And then we're going to lose anything, not anything that has a 2 in it, but some of the numbers that have a 2 in it. Right. So anything that has a 2 plus a number that's small enough to complement it converges to a single-digit number. So that's like 42, 32, 22, 12, like those numbers. And then the 3s are also going to have that property, but there's fewer of them. And then the 4s, and there's this sort of triangle that's being carved off across the top that like those are all going to be single digits immediately. And then it was sort of like, okay, so we know that those are the ones that have the lowest persistence. So is the highest persistence going to be kind of at the opposite end, that opposite triangle where each of the digits is really high. And then, so it's easy to think of things like 99, like those are huge, right? But the problem is that 9 times 9 is 81, and now you got a 1. And so now it's that sort of thinking about, well, hold on, how do I avoid a 1 in the 1's place when I multiply these two digits together? So, and then also maybe how do I avoid a 2? And if I'm going to get a 2, how do I make sure that it's not a 2 coupled with a small number? So it's not necessarily avoiding a 2. And then just sort of starting to play with the numbers in that bottom right-hand triangle to look at where are the numbers that you have to be careful of, like 76. 7 times 6 is 42. Well, that's going to converge pretty quickly to a single-digit number. 88 times 7 is 56. Okay, this has some promise. The problem with 56 is that it becomes 30, and 30 then converges to 0. So it's not clear exactly how to proceed, which is what I love about this task, because every time I try something, I learn something new, right? Like 99,
because
something. Oh, there's the 1. Okay, got to watch out for 1s, and then try something else. Oh, there's a 2, and watch out for those. And oh, here comes this one's pretty good, but I actually try to avoid anything with a 5 in it, right? Because 5s will go to 0s very quickly if you're not careful, and so on.
And I think that, to quote you, I mean, problem solving is what you do when you don't know how to do it, right? So
yeah.
Here you're and of course when you do this with the kids, some kids just guess at the very beginning and 99, let's try, right? Your approach, of course, it's a much more problem solving strategy oriented, and that's a skill that we want to foster in our kids. And as you do this, you are doing tons of multiplications.
Right, and it's what George Polya and Alan Schoenfeld would refer to as tapping into a repertoire of past experience. So I'm doing that. But at the same time, I'm doing what John Mason talks about, which is specializing. When I got up there and I just said, well, let's try 99, let's try 89, let's try 79, right? Let's try 56. And you're trying things with no hope that this is necessarily going to be the answer, but with every hope that I'm going to learn something from it. Mm-hmm. So one of the things I learned in thinking classrooms research is it's really hard to study something that is staying still. You need to get it in motion. So you got to poke it, right? So let's try implementing something new. Let's do something contrarian. Let's get that movement happening so that we can study it a little bit better. It's the same thing here. I don't know what's going to happen, but I need to poke it so I can learn something from it in being in motion.
And it's math investigation at its best, just at the core of math. I mean, there is no artificial context. It's just because it's interesting, because we're asking questions and trying to answer them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one question in the chat just now, Albert, what does persistence refer to in this case? How long the numbers can maintain two or more digits as you multiply the digits? The answer is yes. Like we're trying to keep double digits as long as possible, and each time that you split, so like if you look at 36, we split that number once, got to 18, split it twice. It's a persistence two that got us to a single digit. So that's where we are for that
So
one.
more
So thank you for
specifically, Jesse has the right definition, and then you have to add one.
yeah.
But it's how many times do you multiply before you lose two-digit number?
Before you have one digit, right? And you could think
Right.
of persistence with 3 digits and redefine it, or maybe go to another operation, of course. And now maybe it's time to show the solution, because I mean, the visual of it is amazing, right? Spoiler alert,
Yeah.
it's coming.
Close your eyes, plug your ears.
Pause your video if you're watching the recording.
Exactly.
Anybody who's doing like, okay, here we go.
There you go. Yes. And the first thing that kids notice here is the symmetry, right? And it's beautiful, because if you, and I always say this and teachers laugh kind of nervously, but I mean it. If you don't see, or you don't have the commutative property in your head yet, if you don't see it right away when you see multiplication, you deserve somehow to do twice the work. Right? And it's worth it. It's worth it, because you're going to learn. You're going to learn that it was not necessary, that you could be more lazy in a mathematical way, in a good way, right? So it's a good thing that you are like required to do more and more if you need it. And that's a beautiful thing about this activity, that it
But it's
adapts itself.
more so than that. What it does is it builds up a tension, and when you do see that symmetry, that tension is released, and it just and it's gonna imprint on you. The affect of that moment is going to imprint that memory in your space, in your brain, and you're always going to see symmetries from then on.
And maybe you don't remember what's 7 times 3, but symmetry helps you. You remember what's 3 times 7. So go ahead and use that as a fact, right? The second thing, and we have to move on. I know I love this activity. I could be here forever, but is that there is no persistence 5. We changed that after trying. As I said, we keep improving our resources. First time we had only until persistence 4, but then a kid got lucky and found it just right away and said, oh, I found it. It's 77. Oh my gosh, after preparing the activity for so long, and then a kid in 10 seconds kills it. So next time we decided to, okay, let's see if they keep thinking, right? It's kind of a keep thinking question embedded in the activity, right? Because even if they get lucky, they will think that a persistence 5 is hiding somewhere.
Well, and Albert, I love this because it's like it's intrinsic motivation. Like when you see that there is a possibility of a persistence 5, it's gonna like internally students are going to want to keep trying and trying and trying to try to get that 5. Even if they get 1 4, they might see if there's another 4. I've heard that in classrooms before where they talk about like, well, you got 1 4, there has to be another. They wouldn't just give us 1. And then they go into that even more, which this allows this activity to be a very low floor, high ceiling, wide walls, concept where students are really diving in, and it's very non-confrontational. It's very much that like math therapy, math guru Vanessa would absolutely love a problem like this because it kind of eliminates any math anxiety because we're just practicing multiplication at its simplest form, trying to figure out where the persistence 5.
Right. And when I did this task, so I did this with a group of grade 5 students, and I phrased it slightly different. I launched it very much the same way this one was launched. I had them on their feet with me at a whiteboard. We did an example. I allowed them to call out different numbers, and then I just grabbed one of the numbers and we ran it as an example. And I introduced, because for an opening example, you want something that is not persistence 1. And you also want something that is not persistence 4, right? So that sort of give me more numbers, and then I knew which kind of number I was looking for. I was looking for a yellow number. And then I ran an example, and then my question to them was, I want to know what the persistence of all 2-digit numbers is. And so off they went. And that felt overwhelming to begin with, but they started to look for patterns and symmetries and so on. But one of the things, and this ties into what you said, Rob, there's kids in there who are not great at multiplication or don't know their facts. but they never felt excluded because they were in a random group of 3, and maybe they don't know what 4 times 8 is, but somebody in the group knew what 4 times 8 is, and it's 32. And then they're like, oh, but I know what 3 times 2 is, right? So that there was always these moments where someone could do the heavy lifting if I didn't know it, but then I could come right back in with the next part of it because there was always a place where I could enter. And the patterns that they started to spot as they were working on this, and just that sort of pursuit of completion was so interesting. And what was nice about it was there's questions in the Q&A about, do we ever do 3-digit numbers, right? What do you think the kids wanted to do once they had this figured out? They wanted to go into 3-digit numbers, right? And then they had to negotiate that space. Well, hold on. Is it 3-digit numbers that have to say 3-digit numbers? Or is it just until it gets down to a 1-digit number? And then they settled it has to, as soon as it gets to a 1-digit number, we stop, right? But it was, yeah, and they just wanted to keep working. And, you know, like sneakily, we just tricked them into doing about 600 multiplication questions in a way that felt purposeful. Not purposeful in the way of like, yeah, answer the question, turn it into a letter and see what word it spells at the bottom, but purposeful in the sense that they were looking to discover something. There was knowledge there that was within their fingertips, and they wanted to get their head around that knowledge. And they didn't want to just get the answer. They wanted to understand why this was the answer.
Well, and this isn't just some random activity that Albert pulled up. This is actually in our 5th grade curriculum at Innovamat. So this is what we call an adventure. So this is part of it. And yes, I think we are sharing the activity somewhere in the chat. If not, I'll make sure that everybody is able to get access to that. But Albert, you can go ahead and move on. We have about 8 or 9 minutes for your next activity. I'm excited to see if you can do this.
Yeah, of course. I mean, follow-up questions, what is most frequent, right? And then you have the excuse to go for a bar graph and see how they behave, etc., right? And you can, because when we were, of course, when you have rich tasks, but then you have to map some of the standards, right? And at some point you want to talk about bar graphs, and in why not here, right? Why not use this activity to have an excuse to make a mathematical statistical investigation? And it's great sometimes to have questions about what we had for breakfast, but sometimes the investigation
you have at home.
Exactly, but sometimes the investigation is just here, right? Answering what is more likely here, it's much harder at a glance than answering it here, right? And that's what makes graphs purposeful for these kids. Anyway, we could be here forever. This is a 1-hour activity, but you could be, and of course, if you want to do it in earlier grades, I think you could do it in 3rd and 4th grade. In 5th, you can use more of the power the kids have to discuss the patterns, because then they don't stay that much into the multiplication part. But anyway, let's do another one. It will be shorter, I promise.
Okay.
If you're okay with that. Yes, you're ready? You're
ready.
nervous? Okay, what do you see? What do you notice? What do you wonder? Peter, Rob?
I've never seen this one before. Okay.
What do you see?
The numbers.
Numbers?
One of them is a
shapes.
square number. I see one that's
Shapes.
a square number. Shapes, colors.
Okay, 36, yes.
One is 3 times a square number.
Okay. Good. And shapes, different shapes and different numbers, right? And I like opening the question like this, because then I make sure that the classroom knows that we're talking about numbers and shapes, right? Because if I jump directly to this, sometimes we miss the explanation. So let's go step by step. Any 2 numbers go in the circles. Right? I love that. The sum of the 2 numbers from the previous row goes in the rectangle, and the difference goes in the hexagon. So we have to deal with some shapes recognition. Of course, it's just an excuse, but there you go. And then let's do it. What do you notice and what do you wonder? Let's do this together, right? I hope everyone at home is taking pen and paper.
Okay. Now
we're
doing it together in public.
So let's see what goes in the first hexagon. Let me know when you have it, Rob or Peter. It's not a competition.
First hexagon, 39.
Or first rectangle, and the orange problem.
I got 111 and 39.
111 and 39.
Did I get that right? I was doing it.
Do you agree, Rob? Think so, right?
Yeah. I'm just
feel
checking
that-
Peter's work.
That's good. That's really
Check your
important.
understanding. Check Peter's understanding.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, and then next row. What happens in the next row? The last row of the orange problem. I don't know if I can write here. Can I write here? Let's see.
We got
Could be able to annotate.
150 and 72.
Can you see what I'm doing?
Yes.
Yep.
Forgive my handwriting on the trackpad.
Did you get the same thing, Rob? 150 and 72?
Yeah. Yeah. 150 and 72.
150 and 72. Okay, now what do you notice and what do you wonder?
They're twice the numbers at the beginning.
So if we
That is
so now I don't know if your itchy
why
brain
is that?
Why is that happening? So maybe we can you can see how this green gives you an opportunity to try again and see what happens. It's harder because we only have one number.
Yeah.
But do you want to try another combination here?
Oh, I see why this is happening.
You see why now?
Yeah, but I had to cheat. I
What do you mean by cheating? I love that. What do you mean
had
by
to use
cheating?
algebra.
Oh, I mean, it's not cheating depending on the grade you are in. It's not cheating, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know. Rob, you're in charge of the timing here of the clock. I could be here forever. But what do you think? We can do the green one or move on to another example within the same task?
So this is
feel about it?
interesting. Okay, so hold on. So if we pick, does that mean that we can pick any two numbers that add to 120 and it'll work?
I don't know. Let's try.
We should definitely try this.
Okay,
So let's do, Peter, let's do like a low hanging fruit. Let's do like 120.
okay.
Like let just to see if that worked. And full disclosure for everybody, I'm new enough to the company. I have yet to see this one also. So
there's a ton of tasks hidden in the rich tasks hidden. So what
until
numbers
20 minutes
do I
before the
write?
webinar, Albert didn't tell me what we were doing. So for this one,
that's the fun part of it.
So good. Yeah, it does work. So if we go 120, it does work.
Okay.
So what numbers did you pick, Peter, here?
120.
Okay. I was not getting the 120. Okay, and then the difference here is 80, right?
Yeah.
So we go again.
240. Yeah.
What?
200.
Okay.
So okay. So where was your mind going the first time, Peter, for the?
Well, I wanted to, like, when I see problems like this, I always want to push into the limitation. So guess what? 60 and 60 works, right? So if you go 60, 60, it still works, even though the first hexagon is going to be 0.
Interesting.
Okay. Well, if we go 80 and 40,
I'm going to try to break this. What? No way.
What are you trying?
I'm trying a negative number.
Hey, I'm gonna.
It still works.
Erase this. I don't know if can go to the next slide.
Okay, now that's just cool.
But since I know that since time is a constraint, let's see this. But I love the green one here, Peter, since you brought it up.
Yeah.
Because this first row pushes you to what? The addition is 1 and the difference is 7. What?
Yeah.
Is that even an option? It is an option, right?
It is an option.
It is.
It is an option, of course, depending on the grade you're in.
Yes.
So now we're going to go to the spoiler alert, but just before killing the activity, and it's much shorter than the persistence. It's much of a shorter task. But Peter, how would you envision this in a thinking classroom style if you had to present it to your kids?
Okay. So if I was to do this in a thinking classroom, and I would probably do with a younger grade. I would give them, I would start with, I give 2 numbers and then they work it through. Then I would give another 2 numbers and they work it through. And then I would give something in the second row, maybe both numbers, maybe one.
Let me go back.
Yeah, I have to play. Is that easier or giving 2 numbers easier? I think this is easier giving 1 number, then giving 2 numbers, then maybe giving something in the third row and making them work backwards. And then after they had played with this enough, again, I'm talking like grade 3s, I could probably do this with. I would then have them start to create their own and see where they start to push the boundaries on this. And are they coming up with things like, are they going, well, what if the 2 numbers are the same? What if 1 number is 0? All right, they're not ready to go into negative numbers yet, but what happens when they go into these spaces and start playing with this?
There you go. And do you think that this could last for an hour? Because we have this at the end of the session, like this exact task at the end of a 3rd grade session would be like the last 20, 15 minutes, depending on the classroom. But before that, we have a lot of manipulative with doubles and halves, because we want to foster this reflection on, we went fast over it, but the aha moment, or the more than an aha moment, the surprise moment, the what that you were expressing so vividly, Peter, was that the numbers in the last row are twice the numbers in the first row.
Yeah.
Right.
Right, but there's something interesting happening with that middle number, and there's again that play that they're engaging in. Can it last an hour? Yeah, like I could make a building thinking classroom lesson that lasts an hour, but that complete lesson would have a consolidation, and that would probably be what would I call a teacher scribe, where we would gather at a whiteboard, and I would have maybe 2 or 3 examples up there. And they would have to, as a plenary, we would talk our way through some of the things and what kind of things did you notice. And then I would have them doing some check your understanding questions, and I would give them some mild, medium, spicy. And then maybe the spicy ones would push into maybe different structures where there's, okay, here's the new rule that you have to apply or something like this. But I could easily build a lesson that would last for an hour that would have them exploring addition and subtraction again in very meaningful ways.
So each of you keep talking about extending this for an hour, but Albert, we need to get going.
My fault. So yeah, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
Why it works.
Well, hold on. Stop right there for a second, because there was somebody in the chat was like, "Oh, we could do this with algebra. This would be so cool." Well, there we go.
That's actually, just real quick. This going back for a second. This is for us is a session in 3rd grade. It could be earlier with probably smaller numbers. And this is later in almost middle school, right, with negative numbers and fractions again. And we keep using the same layout, so kids can keep remembering this idea and keep training their eyes. At the end of each of these tasks, there's always this question: what do you spot? What do you notice, right? Yeah. And why? And then, of course, if you do the algebra, you kind of see the magic happening, and it's always like this, right? When you add and when you subtract. And the beautiful proof, if kids have been following math through Innovamat along the years, they kind of have a relief and aha moment at the end when they see algebra playing a good role here, helping them understand why the heck this was working. But before algebra, you can prove it, somehow prove it with manipulatives, right, as well, and see that always the amount of cubes or units that you have at the top row, it's half of what you have in the last row.
And what's interesting about this, can I just say something, is that
of course
it also feeds into integers, because this idea of difference, you can think of difference as just the difference between the 2 numbers, or you can actually treat it, the rules are it's subtraction, because now if I go 40, 80, I actually get into some negative numbers, but then it comes back to positive numbers and the rule still works. And yeah, there's some interest.
To avoid that, I'm glad you said that. Just to avoid that, you see that one circle is bigger. Yes. The first times we do this activity, we ask the kids to place the bigger number in the bigger circle to avoid that difficulty, right? But later on, it doesn't matter. Yeah. Okay, I think that we have, I mean, and we could be here forever talking about how to implement and make this task richer.
say one more thing. There's a question here. This would be a great non-curricular. Yeah, like these are all math, right? And what defines something as non-curricular, curricular is not whether it's mathematics or whether it's curriculum. It's where it intersects with the learner, right? So if this task intersects with grade 3 students, it's curricular. But if it intersects with grade 8 students, it's non-curricular, right? So it's really about when the task intersects with the learner and the curriculum. And so where it intersects with the learner is what defines whether it's a thinking task or not, right? And where it intersects with a curriculum is whether it defines it as a non-curricular or curriculum task.
How beautiful it is
Thank
that
you.
my question to you in Washington was exactly this one. What makes a curricular task curricular or non-curricular? And now the circle is closed. I love it.
All right. So as we're wrapping up tonight, we have about 4 minutes left on the recording side of it, and we will stick around for up to 10 minutes after to answer questions. But I want to be mindful of everybody's time. So as we're wrapping up here and we get into this last piece, for anybody who has questions, we're going to get into a question and answer right now. Go ahead and start dropping your questions into the Q&A feature as I move along into this. Albert, go ahead and go to the next slide. So some things to think about, some takeaways and some things to talk about with Innovamat. So we have a core curriculum that's pre-K to 5 with supplemental programs as well, that are focused on number sense and supporting families and engaging the community and things like that as well. And you could see a sample of what's to come with our Innovamat curriculum with Peter's little anecdotes and tips for adding BTC into an Innovamat lesson. We also provide professional development where BTC and Innovamat Math Ed experts who are going to co-host and virtual and also in-person workshops, providing ongoing training and thinking about math learning. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Albert. And before we answer some of these questions, go ahead and scan this QR code for a few different things. First, for free resources that will come to you from Innovamat and BTC. Also to learn more. And we are going to be offering a pilot for up to 100 schools. Right now, we are around 50% capacity. So apply for the pilot before Pi Day. Yes, we are a math ed company, and yes, we picked 3.14. So please make sure that you apply. I know some of you are teachers, and you may have to take this back to your administration and say, "Hey, like, am I able to, do this? This is something that we'd really like to do." Please, by all means, like, get this in before Pi Day. If you'd like to see us with Peter in the future, we have the Enjoy Thinking Reimagining Elementary Math, which is in person in New Jersey. That's a complete sold out event. We do these Enjoy Thinking conferences all around the world. We also have the CMC Central, where we're going to be in person March 7th and 8th in Bakersfield, California. We have the BTC conference coming up. That's Peter's BTC conference is going to be in Seattle on June 30th. And then an Enjoy Thinking, the Power of Thinking Math is going to be in person in Chicago, October 27th. A couple other Enjoy Thinkings that are to come. One is going to be out in California at some point in the future. And then one's going to be here in Pittsburgh, where I'm at currently, sometime in the future as well. So with all that, let's get into a couple of these questions that we have. Is the curriculum available to individual teachers, or does it have to be purchased by the district? I think I could take that. So from a district perspective, they just reach out to us because the district would have to pay for it, but individual teachers are able to pilot it, and that's no big deal. I'm not seeing any other questions other than, are we open to working in New Zealand? I think Peter travels all over the place, so yeah, we are all open to New Zealand.
Actually,
I know, Jen. I'm looking forward to our time together in New Zealand, and I'm really excited to go to New Zealand personally now that my daughter lives there, and everything she sends just looks amazing. So, Jen, looking forward to it. And Albert, do you want to speak a little bit about Innovamat in New Zealand?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of met again in New Zealand. We forgot that, but remember at the PME, you were online, and I was there for a conference. We were presenting some of my research conducted through Innovamat in New Zealand. Just a funny story, and I loved it. It's definitely one of the best places to go.
Yeah, so I could easily see Innovamat wanting to get to New Zealand pretty quick.
Albert, real quick, can you talk a little bit about our secondary and what's to come for the secondary, especially as we're talking about the United States? Several questions about that throughout the webinar tonight.
I mean, yeah, it's the same that I was explaining at the beginning, of going little by little, step by step, learning on the way. We currently do not have secondary education in the US. We started just 2 years ago piloting a few schools at pre-K, and elementary. Little by little, we go up. We're going to have pre-K 5 next year, well, next academic year in September. And so after that, 6th grade, 7th grade, we will keep going up just as the kids and generations go up. We probably will have secondary education soon enough in the US. But as for now, it exists only in some other countries. Spain is one of them, Italy, but of course, one thing is like the full adoption, and we are not ready to fully implement Innovamat in the US in secondary education, but we have resources, we have plenty of ideas, we have the full curriculum in some countries up until pre-college. So of course, we will be more than happy to discuss some of the rich activities that we have there, and maybe share some of the resources with you in English as well, or in Spanish, of course.
With that, anybody who is still with us right now, we're gonna, end the recording. We'll stay on and answer some of these questions that have filtered in. But we want to thank you so much for joining us tonight with Peter. Thank you, Peter, so much for this partnership and the collaboration that we have. And Albert is the face of the US Innovamat.
With a beautiful, let me say, with a beautiful team of people back in headquarters in many countries, and especially now that I am in the US, the US team is amazing.
Yes, very very fortunate to be a part of Innovamat. And so thank you all for joining us tonight. If you want to stick around for another 10 minutes, because there are some questions that have kind of filtered in, we will stick around and we will answer some of these questions. With that said, after that, if you're gone, you need to leave. Hopefully you see us in person, whether it's at conferences, CMCs, NCTMs, NCSMs. We are going to be around. And as Peter alluded to earlier, the Innovamat folks travel. So you will find us. If it's a math conference to be had, you're probably going to run into one of us.
Or no, I've never seen Innovamat in groups of less than groups of 2. So it's
sometimes 2 or in pods of like 14. All right, thank you, everybody.
There you go.
Thanks,
thank you.
Everybody.
It was a pleasure.